Hello and welcome back to the Logosians Podcast. I'm Dylan, and with me are Josh.
What's up, everybody?
Charlie.
Hey, guys.
Derek.
Hi.
And for the first time getting the call up to the major leagues, we have Tim, our lovely editor.
Editor-in-chief.
Yes.
Yeah.
That sounds very official.
So we're back in the Lion and the Ring series, and specifically back in Narnia. I'm going to take the L on this because I know last time I said we were probably going to do about 2 episodes per book, and at this point, this is probably going to be like the 4th episode, just of us talking about Narnia. So I'll let you know that we're sitting down to discuss the rest of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, chapters 9 through 17. How many episodes that's going to be, I don't know. But with that in mind, gents, just going to open it up to you guys on where you're at as far as having read through and finished up the book. Anything, any takeaways or?
Here we go.
Already
calling me out.
Yes, Tim, go ahead.
So I've read it through 3 times this week. No, I've never read any of these books at all.
Yeah,
And I don't plan to.
I don't plan to. I don't care.
I think you guys are weird. I just wanted up front seat.
we actually have a gun pointed at Tim
Where
underneath
am
the
I?
table. He is being forced into this conversation.
I was lied to. I thought this was something else.
Josh told me we
This
were
is an
GMing a
A&A
Star
meeting.
Wars game.
Yeah. Part 2 of our campaign.
So, Derek, what are your thoughts overall?
I watched the movies a long time ago. It seemed much different, obviously. I don't know. It just, obviously it was really good. And it seems a lot like Tolkien, where you kind of expect a lot of details, like in a modern novel is very detailed on like battle scenes and stuff like that. Whereas, the last battle in Narnia, you're I was expecting like a detailed fight between Peter and the witch, but like it wasn't, to agree, and that threw me off. Which, but then also reminded me of the way Tolkien describes his battles. So it's just, he just says, and then they fought, and then this side won, this side lost.
Yeah, there was a big difference in the movie where they depict the battle, and they don't really depict as much. Aslan getting all the statues and then leading them back. So I think as far as the stuff that's more visually interesting, they probably chose correctly for the movies.
Yeah.
But you don't get that focus in the books.
I think the problem typically that guys will have whenever they're doing the movies from a book like Lion, Witch, and Wardrobe, though, is like anytime you actually have kid actors, and these are, when you're reading the book, it's more, I don't know, more adult almost, like when it comes to the fighting and what's really going on from what Lewis is talking about, right?
Yeah.
But in the movie, you have kid actors, so there's like so much that they don't want to put out there for it. So I think that, to me, the book just seems more, I don't know, it's deeper than what you'd get from just watching the movie.
It's funny because it's supposed to be a kid's book. Like, he wrote it like for kids, but the entire time I'm like, what, like how old? Because I'm thinking like my kid's age, like 4 or 5.
The person who's never read these books, are they actually running people through with their swords and like killing people?
It doesn't really say. And we'll get into some of the description, but all they say is that some people died in the battle, and then like the witch was turning a lot of people to stone.
Yeah. There's no like.
And then it says that Edmund was horribly wounded, like to the point where he was about to die. But it doesn't say how.
That,
it just says that he was
about
wounded.
the extent of the gore.
I'm trying to remember when Peter fought Maugrim. Was that? I can't remember if that was detailed or not. I'm trying to remember off the top of my head.
It says that he stabbed up like in front of his hind leg through to his heart.
So
and then he fell down on him.
So there's some detail.
So there's that. But it's it's like he's talking about stabbing a wolf.
One thing that I noticed that's really different was that Aslan has a lot of dialogue in this one, which obviously pushes forward what you were just talking about of like, this is very adult because it's taking a lot of time to establish like who he is. This is the Christ figure in the story. And he does a lot of speaking about who he is compared to like in the films when you just kind of get these little drive-by sequences from other people. So Aslan, I feel like, is a more well-developed character in this than he was in the film for sure. And that's just something I noticed on this read-through.
So I listened to the last half of it earlier today on YouTube, actually.
So you went into the last second too?
Yeah, that's my fault.
Yeah. I made my notes too.
Sorry.
I have an earbud in listening to it currently.
Yeah, Mr. Beaver. Yeah, Mrs. Beaver. I mean, it's only a 4.5 hour audio.
Yeah, it's not very long.
It's a very short book.
Not a very long story overall, but I mean, it's like we said, it's more compact, but it like hits harder.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
packed with some dense stuff.
Yeah.
So you guys want to get into the text?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's do it.
All right, so I'm going to get a little deeper into chapter 9 than probably the rest of them, just to set the tone. And I think this has a lot of stuff here. So where we left off, the Pevensies were in the Beaver's house, and they had just realized that Edmund had disappeared. So chapter 9 is called In the Witch's House, and it opens with this. I'm just going to read the whole quote. And now, of course, you want to know what had happened to Edmund. He had eaten his share of the dinner, but he hadn't really enjoyed it because he was thinking all the time about Turkish delight. And there's nothing that spoils the taste of good ordinary food half so much as bad magic food. And he had heard the conversation and hadn't enjoyed it much either because he kept on thinking that the others were taking no notice of him and trying to give him the cold shoulder. They weren't, but he imagined it. And then it goes on to say, for the mention of Aslan gave him a mysterious and horrible feeling, just as it gave the others a mysterious and lovely feeling. So, you get this feel of where Edmund is at right now, and it just gets worse throughout this chapter. But, we spent a lot of time talking about this the last time.
Yeah, that little opening statement in itself is like a microcosm of some of the stuff we explored last time. Like his insecurities causing him to doubt the integrity of everything around him to justify what he's done. Being scared of the name of Aslan and like conviction setting in or whatever. So yeah.
So then he sets out. He's trying to find the witch's palace, and all the while he's walking, and he continues questioning people, and he's rationalizing. The White Witch is probably good, and they're her enemies, so they're probably just lying.
Yeah, of course, enemies of her would say this.
Right, and then it mentions that he just realized he doesn't have his coat, and he's kind of cold, but it's too late to go back for that now. And then we'll come back to that in a minute. So I feel like this atmosphere that he sets here is really good because he keeps describing it as getting darker, where he can't see. It's getting colder. He's having to trudge through snow. There's no good paths. And it says the silence and loneliness were dreadful. And while he's going along, he starts dwelling on, when he's the king, as the witch promised him, he's going to make good roads and stuff like that while he's trudging through all the snow and stuff. Trudging, whatever. And then, it just keeps going on about how he's getting even colder, and it's even harder because he's going uphill. He starts blaming Peter for all of this. It's just like he cannot get over, like every single problem is somebody else's fault this whole time. And again, it just reminds me of myself as a kid.
Specifically, it's not just anybody else's or everybody else's fault. It's specifically the person who's above you, like who has more authority. Yeah. In this case, it's his older brother. Mm-hmm. So yeah, always blaming the person in charge.
Yep.
I do that.
Yeah, of course.
We all do.
It's a little brother thing.
So once he gets to the witch's palace, I'll read this quote of the description. It seemed to be all towers, little towers with long, pointed spires on them, sharp as needles. They looked like huge dunces' caps or sorcerers' caps, and they shone in the moonlight, and their long shadows looked strange on the snow. Edmund began to be afraid of the house. So I find it, like really good imagery that he's dwelling on. Sharp as needles, these spires. It looks totally if you picture it, it looks totally inhuman, and there's good reason for him to be afraid. But I also find it funny that he throws in there, it looks like a dunce's cap. It's just kind of reminding you, like, Edmund is being dumb here. Really dumb.
Sounds like somebody familiar with that. He's probably worn some in his life.
Yeah, for real. But it's like a huge dunce's cap or sorcerer's cap, which is probably what everyone else would have been thinking. But and then it dwells on him. Actually, he's actually afraid now, and for good reason. But he doesn't listen to that yet because he says, "But it was too late to think of turning back now." And I think that's something that like we often tell ourselves when we're in the middle of going down a bad path, is that it's too late for me to turn back. But it's not, and we'll see.
That's the same way with like the way he views Peter. Like he blames everybody else. Whenever you're going down that path that you're not really supposed to. Like if you see someone that is going down the right path, you're like, well, this guy, he's got it made. You end up blaming that person for some reason. I mean, they may not.
Yeah, he just happened to be born first.
Yeah,
that's totally unfair.
Yeah.
But like you talked about last episode, like once you start lying, you have to continue to lie to cover that up. So now if Edmund is exposed, because if he does go back, like he says here, he not only has to deal with the initial lie, but the myriad of lies that he's used to cover it up. So like his shame is magnified with the further you go down the path. So
yeah, well, because he's already thinking that he's going to be in charge of Peter and the other ones, like they're going to be his subjects, right? Yeah, that's what's going to be.
that's
happen.
at least the hope he's still
right
on to. Yeah.
But
he's scared, but he hasn't given up on the Turkish delight and the idea that he's going to get back at Peter.
Right, exactly. So like if he definitely turns back now, there's no to him there's no hope of him being like restored basically into some sort of like role of prestige, right?
Yeah.
So there's no, even with that, it's like even harder to turn back, because if I turn back now, I'm definitely going to be the laughing stock of
he's past
Peter.
forgiveness, right?
Yeah, he's past it. Yeah.
Too far gone. Really quick, if you don't mind, before we move forward, this made me, the whole dunce's hat thing actually made me think of another thing that really stuck out to me this read through that I think really separates Lewis from the pack, is how well he writes children. Like because he can go, and he's brilliant. We've talked about in previous episodes like how much of like an intellectual colossus he is, and yet he's so good and captivating at like going down and writing from the perspective of a child, specifically Lucy.
He didn't have kids.
Yeah, and he didn't even have kids, which is amazing. But but specifically Lucy, I'd say. But even in these moments, you see with Edmund, like how he, I don't know, he's so good at that. And I think that's part of why you were asking earlier, like how is this a kid's book, or it's supposed to be a kid's book? And I think honestly, it's because of that, because it follows the journey of these children who he just so happens to be excellent at writing.
Yeah,
and
when we get to his other fiction later, he's not just good at writing kids; he's really good at writing, people of all ages,
just writing
and species.
Yeah,
he's a master.
Yeah, for sure.
So anyway, Edmund walks into the palace grounds through the open gate, and it dwells on him seeing an enormous lion crouched as if it was ready to spring, and he's terrified, and he just sits there for, it says, what seemed like hours, watching it, thinking that any second now this thing's going to jump on me and kill me, and maybe it's Aslan. And he remembers, oh wait, they said that the witch turns people to stone. So he starts to slowly get the confidence to creep forward. And at this point, he's actually decided this is probably Aslan. Who's afraid of Aslan? He says mockingly, and he's thinking like the witch already got him. She's fine. They were all like their plans are nothing. And to put a bow on it, he draws glasses and a mustache on this stone lion just to further the mocking. Which later on he'll get to actually meet Aslan face to face, and obviously
does he have the mustache and glasses on?
No, this isn't Aslan.
Oh. Does that lion come back to life?
He does, and he does have the glasses in the movie. He still has it on him. Later on at the coronation, he's standing there like they're walking through, the spears raised on both sides, and he's just over there at the side with the glasses and mustache. It's perfect.
What would be great is if like that lion goes on to be like really good friends with Edmund, and it's like, actually I like it.
It's actually a good look for me. I couldn't grow facial hair before.
So, as he's traveling further into the, the outer halls or whatever, it's describing a bunch of other creatures he's seeing, stone giants, and suddenly I forgot what all of the other creatures were, but there's a lot of them.
Some of the same things that we've talked about earlier. I think there were specifically nymphs and dryads.
Yeah, there's a centaur and there's a dragon and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And then he comes up to the end of the hall, and he's trying to step over what he thinks is a wolf that's turned to stone. But the wolf stands up, and it's Maugrim, the chief of police. And, so he's like, what are you doing here? I was here to see the queen. So hold on, let me go get her. Okay, come on, follow me in here. And as he goes through, he sees a stone fawn, and he's thinking to himself, this might be Lucy's friend. He doesn't remember his name yet, but this is the guy that he turned in, basically. Unintentionally, of course. He didn't really know what he was doing, but it's just like he's being confronted with the consequences. And what does he get when he sees the White Witch? She's just really unhappy to see him because he didn't bring everyone else like he said he was going to. And so she's
and then has the nerve to be like, could I get some more of that Turkish delight?
Yeah. And she shuts that down, and then he says something about like they were, at the Beaver's house, and they're talking about Aslan, and she freaks out. So that picks right up into chapter 10. The spell begins to break, and it jumps back to the Beavers and the other children that didn't trade on them. And they're all packing up in a hurry. They know that at this point Edmund's probably gone to the White Witch. And just kind of skipping through, they get out of there as fast as they can, as fast as Miss Beaver will let them, because she's trying to pack up everything possible.
Which is approximately 12 miles per hour if we're recording how fast a beaver can run.
Thank you for that. The more you know.
That's amazing.
The more you know. Not anywhere near as fast as a wolf, by the way. We clarified that.
40 miles per hour.
Yeah. It would not be a very good race.
It's not a.
Is that on land?
It's not a matchup.
It's a mismatch.
No.
Now, if you put them in water, that's reversed.
Oh yes, absolutely. So anyway, they go on their journey, and then they find a cave to stop and rest in for a little bit, and wake up to the sound of jingling bells. Of course, we've seen already that the White Witch travels on a sleigh with reindeer and bells, and this like weird mockery of Santa Claus. But
Weird flex.
But what we know at the end of the last chapter, she said, "Get the sleigh without the bells." So we already know that this isn't her. She wants to be stealth mode. And so Mr. Beaver immediately goes out.
They don't know that,
Right.
but we do as readers.
Right.
Navy SEALs are going into battle. They're like, hey, let's take the sleigh bells off of this helicopter.
Light and noise discipline, thank you.
In this story, the Navy SEAls would be SEAls.
Yeah, actual SEALs.
Don't forget Mr. Beaver.
Mr. Beaver.
So he goes out to check on him, and then he's out there for a little bit, and they hear voices and think that, oh, no, he must have been caught. But then he's like, hey, it's all right, come on out here. And they see that the sleigh with reindeer and bells, like the reindeer are much larger and they're brown. Now, of course, I don't think that any of these people, except for the Beavers, have probably seen the White Witch's sleigh before, so they wouldn't have known that hers were smaller and white, but the narrator tells us this. And then they see Father Christmas, who it describes as wearing a big red robe and white beard. Pretty dead giveaway. And it says in direct quote, "Everyone knew him because though you see people of his sort only in Narnia, you see pictures of them and hear them talked about even in our world." So here we come back to the whole, the myths in our world are true there, and that we're just hearing just an echo of them. And then he says, "I've come at last. She kept me out for a long time, but I have got in at last. Aslan is on the move. The witch's magic is weakening." And
So it's implied that it was the White Witch's like magic that kept him at bay. I've always wondered what that actually looked like. Like what is because for all we know, he just kind of shows up and just makes this like reference. But I wonder like or at least I don't remember from my reading the other books if it's actually detailed what like her specific attack against him and how she keeps him out or whatever. But
no, it never really goes into detail. But the chapter is called "The Spell Begins to Break," so it's just implied that there's some sort of
mass.
I don't know, eternal winter spell that she cast, and is somehow, I guess, has a Santa Claus barrier.
He ate too much Turkish delight.
Yes.
Which is interesting for someone, he can get through any chimney or whatever. In fact, he says in here, whenever he's given Miss Beaver gifts, and she's like, "Well, the door's locked on the down." He's like, "Locks are no problem for me." But apparently, some sort of magic spell.
Mr. Beaver locked the door.
Yeah.
Give
That'd
the
be fun if
witch.
he's like, "Your dam has a door."
Well, how did you guys put a lock on there? But so what do you think overall? We talked about the whole always winter, never Christmas, but what is this about, like Santa popping up in here? Because this is one of the things we've talked about, like Tolkien had a problem with the mix and match here.
Yeah. Well, I think obviously it's you have Aslan. It's implied here that that Father Christmas has been away and it only came in because Aslan is on the move or whatever. So it's basically like Aslan has returned, which has opened up the door for Father Christmas, who I guess in this story would represent like the joy of this season, right?
Yeah.
The joy of winter. So yeah, it's literally that, like that he represents joy and maybe even hope.
Yeah.
Entering back into the world or whatever.
Yeah.
Whereas when Aslan was away, the spell was up. So yeah, so him being here is basically it's like he is the first tangible evidence that they've seen, or the first tangible sign of the tide turning.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah. No, I don't want to dwell on this too much right now, because when we get into Planet Narnia, we'll talk about it a little more. But this is, like I said last time, this is the Jupiter book, and Jupiter at least in the medieval worldview, was this symbol of like the jovial king. And so he talks about in the chapter on this book, what better symbol of this like jovial king than Santa. And then he's coming back, and it dwells on this poem that Lewis wrote that has a line in there that's like winter's past and guilt forgiven, and this whole idea about that joy and hope coming back at the end of winter and then the coming of spring. So I feel like that's sort of what they're going with on the imagery there. So
And he gives them gifts.
yeah, and then he comes bearing gifts, and they are, as he says, tools, not toys. And he addresses them all like they're adults here, and he gives them, they're definitely not toys. He gives Peter a sword and a shield, and Susan gets bow and arrows, and then she gets a horn, and Lucy is given a diamond cordial made of the juice of one of the fire flowers that grows into the mountains of in the mountains of the sun. And then he says that this is basically it'll heal anyone that's hurt. So magic healing potion.
Some orange drink.
Yeah, of course. I wish I meant to look up, what this idea was of fire flowers that grow in the mountains of the sun. Maybe that's just something.
I always assumed, or when I went over this again, I was assuming that it was something that maybe was expounded upon elsewhere that I've just forgotten, like a little detail, but maybe not.
Yeah,
You could tell Father Christmas is like, yeah, you get a sword and shield, I'll give you a bow and arrow. And he's like, maybe it's irresponsible for me to give a weapon to like this little kid.
Here's some magic potion.
Here's some orange juice,
to
little
heal
girl.
them.
Could you imagine the modern equivalent of this? Like Santa pulls up, these are tools, not toys. AR-15.
Glock 43.
Yeah, exactly.
Definitely,
Instead of the horn.
Definitely don't give that to Edmund. School shooter alert.
Just took a dark turn.
Teach you to boss me around, Peter. Anyway, and Lucy also gets a dagger. Just gonna throw that out there. So, chapter 11, Aslan is nearer, back with Edmund, and he is not having a good time at all. This is absolutely not what he expected. The witch is not even acknowledging him. In fact, at one point when he begs for food, Turkish delight specifically, of course, but anything really, because he's hungry and hasn't had anything to eat, she tells her dwarf, feed the human creature.
Yeah, I remember that.
So, yeah, the whole...
Sounds like my junior prom. Like, going and like the chick just ditches me. There's like no food. I'm just like, this is terrible.
Yeah.
I just want some Turkish delight.
Yeah, I remember I paused that and I had to go back. I was like, did she really just call him?
She just called him the human creature. Yeah. Yeah, so it turns out that this random stranger that gave him candy was lying about a lot of
Doesn't
stuff.
care.
Doesn't care about him at all.
She ends up
It's
just
like I
tossing
make
like
him
some-
king.
She ends up tossing him like some stale bread, doesn't she?
Yeah, they give him
Yeah.
moldy bread, which is delicious, of course. Absolutely delicious. And then we have a quote in here. This is just the narrator. All the things he had said to make himself believe that she was good and kind and that her side was really the right side sounded silly to him now. He would have given anything to meet the others at this moment, even Peter. So, he's taking the L right now and realizing that he needed to be wearing that dunce's cap.
Yeah, this is like getting into some heavy, and I know we've touched on this a little bit, but this gets in really heavy into like Jordan Peterson stuff. Like Peter is Abel, essentially. He's the ideal.
Appropriate shirt.
Yeah. There you go.
No lobster.
Plug the good doctor, if you would. But yeah,
Clean your room.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, so Peter's the ideal, and so basically when he says, even Peter. It's like even the judge.
Yeah.
Which is pretty profound stuff. You're in a either a very enlightened or just a very dark place. If you're very ready and open to see the judge.
Absolutely. So as they're traveling along, trying to catch up to Aslan, they come up on a party of various animals and mythological creatures. And I thought this quote from the witch was interesting. She comes up on them and she yells, "What is the meaning of all this gluttony, this waste, this self-indulgence? Where did you get all these things?" And, last time we were kind of dwelling on like her preserving this eternal winter and like, and Magician's Nephew, when we get to it, she's kind of frozen her whole world at one point. And I feel like it's interesting that she like this look at evil that Lewis is giving us is this like need to control and make sure that everything is going just right. And she's popping in and like, "Hey, what are you guys doing? Quit having fun." Who let you get all this stuff?
And calling out sin that isn't there too. Remember, she's like, "What is always gluttony?"
Yeah, they're
like
just
points out basically is presenting herself as like righteousness, like she's coming through and seeing something that is inappropriate.
Yeah, and it just kind of describes them as having like a nice meal together out. This is like they're having a backyard barbecue or something.
I know it's obvious, but I always love the fact that all the creatures in this book, they're just little Englishmen.
Yeah,
Absolutely. Because they're like there's like tea and crumpets, and like there's some like at least in the voice acting too, and like the audiobook, like they do such a good job. It's like the old fox gets up and proposes a toast.
So when you get into his other writings like That Hideous Strength, he dwells a lot on these villains being these like moral busybodies that are trying to control stuff, like what they view as excess and frivolity from plain old folk that are just having a decent time and stuff. And I find that interesting. Maybe we'll get into that more as we go throughout his works, but that was definitely an issue that he had with, I guess, the progressives of his day.
Yeah, so like when you were talking about that a minute ago, what it reminded me of is how like in society, especially on social media.
We live in a society.
Yeah. But like social media and everything where someone like will easily call out something and almost trying to make themselves seem righteous as compared to everybody else.
Yeah.
And yeah, whether or not
pointless virtue signaling.
Yes. Virtue signaling.
So
Jadis was a virtue signaler.
Yes, Jadis, the queen of virtue signaling. So she is furious to know that they got this stuff from Father Christmas, and that just this idea that he's even back and he got in, and she's like, he can't possibly have gotten back in. And then she turns to this. No, he didn't. Say you've been lying, and you shall even now be forgiven. So it's like I have not watched that much of Star Trek before, but I've seen this scene many times before where I think it's Picard that's like captured and they're torturing him, and they have like 3 little red lights flashing, and they're trying to get him. Or no, there are 4 red lights flashing, and they're trying to get him to say that there's 3, just to break his spirit and get him to just tell a stupid lie for no reason. And he just keeps going, no, there are 4 lights, and it's this whole like she's just trying to crush their spirit even more. Like, no, say that you've been lying and he hasn't gotten back in, because he can't possibly have. That's fake news. She's like Facebook fact controlling him right now. Yeah. And they don't. In fact, there's like a little baby squirrel that's like, no, he has. And so she goes to...
Good voice acting, by the way. That was good.
Right, yeah, that was my...
I'm definitely going to turn up the squeakiness on
that. So whenever she raises her wand, she's going to turn him into stone. And Edmund is begging her to spare them, but she petrifies them anyway. And then backhands him across the face. So now he's really not having a good time. But this one quote is interesting. The narrator says, "And Edmund, for the first time in the story, felt sorry for someone besides himself." Mm-hmm. So we're starting to see this turn. Like, this is absolutely not what I thought it was. And that there's no way to get around it now. And then, they travel on for a while, and they see that everything is thawing, and they can't really move along on the sled anymore. And the dwarf that's with her is yelling about how this is Aslan's doing, I tell you. And the end of the chapter is the White Witch saying, "If either of you mentions that name again, he shall instantly be killed." So she just does not want to hear it. It absolutely cannot be the case.
Hey, you just checked out our Logosians Podcast. Thanks for stopping by. We appreciate it. Our next video will continue this conversation. In the meantime, find us on Facebook right here. You can also find us on Instagram right there. And right here, you can check us out on YouTube. Be sure you subscribe, hit the bell, and then also comment. We like to interact with you guys. And so if you could comment on a question, maybe you have some sort of insight that we didn't see, go ahead and drop that below. And be sure you share it with your friends, because I'm sure, just like you, we have a lot of people that we like to have this type of discussion about. So share it with them. I'm sure they would love it, and we'll see you next time.